Everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the New Testament church, and we're studying the New Testament chronologically, as it laid out and as it happened in the timeline. And we're in James still. We've been in James. We were in James last week. We're going to finish up James this week, and then um, you know, review that and then head into some of the other books as we continue on this study. But today we're in James 4 verses 13 through 17, a short section. Really, this whole week is short little tidbits as James is finishing up. He kind of hits on a few small points as he finishes up his letter. Into the church, and so we're going to do these. So these should be a little bit shorter, but it doesn't make them any less meaningful, the things that he's hitting on here. And today it's a warning about self-confidence, and this comes from James 4 verses 13 through 17. And he says, look here, you who say today or tomorrow we are going to a certain town and will stay there a year, we will do business there and make a profit. How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, then it's gone. What you ought to say is, if the Lord wants us to. Some versions say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. Otherwise, you are boasting about your own pretentious plans, and all such boasting is evil. And then he finishes this verse off. It almost seems a little separate from what he's talking about here, but I think it does involve this, and there's much more that I think involves in this as well. And we're going to hit on this last verse with 17. It says, remember, it is a sin to know what you ought to do and then not do it. And this is an important one because I think we miss this sometimes, because we think of sinning in the sense of doing something we shouldn't be doing, right? And so it's like, oh, well, I shouldn't be lying, I shouldn't be stealing, I shouldn't be doing these things. But we forget that it is a sin to if you ought to act, if you ought to do something and you don't do it, then that's a sin as well. And we forget that sometimes in the church, because I've seen so many times where we'll let things happen. We kind of ignore it. It's like, well, as long as I'm not the one doing it, then it's okay. And we're going to come to, I want to hit on that a little bit more, but it's not. If we see something happening, if we're supposed to speak up, if we're supposed to act, right? If we're supposed to do what God, and it could be all kinds of things. It could be, someone who's needed in need of help. It could be someone who, they're being treated unfairly, or they're being gossiped about or something. We have this attitude. It's like, oh, well, it's not my problem. I'm not. No, the Bible's saying, look, if you know what you ought to do and you don't do it, then that's a sin as well. And sometimes I think just as much a serious sin, well, I mean, all sin's obviously serious, but just as serious of a sin of actually committing sin itself, things that we're commanded not to do. So I wanted to hit on that verse a little bit, because I think that's a very important verse that I think we overlook a lot of times. And so, just to look at here, to look at this whole thing, right? James is not condemning wise business planning. Right, we talked about the wise man, right, and the wise man who built his house on a rock, right. He's not condemning wise business planning. What he's doing is he's condemning planning that leaves out God, or leaves God out of the picture. You just plan on doing without doing. And so the people that he's talking about in this situation is practically atheists, right? They're living their lives and making their plans as if God doesn't exist at all. And so what we have to do is make sure, and I don't think, like, there's some people who take this verse, and it's like everything they say is like, well, if the Lord wills, if the Lord wills, if the Lord wills. I don't think that's what, I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't do that if you are, I don't think he means it in that sense of everything you say or every plan. If you're going to go down to the gas station to fill up your car, I don't think you have to say, well, if the Lord wills, I'll make it that way. I don't think that's what he's getting at. What he's getting at here is, making plans in your life, planning your life out, to do these things, planning your week out, but leaving God completely out of it. And, especially, if we're neglecting to entrust our hopes and plans to God and his counsel, it's paramount to arrogance and unbelief, right? And it's inconsistent. This type of behavior is inconsistent with genuine saving faith. Like, this is the faith that James has been talking about here, which submits to God. So if we're submitting to God, then we're going to plan our lives out as if his will is part of it. And so if we're making plans for the week, we should be making those plans like, if the Lord wills, we'll do this. And this, in the sense, is, the idea around this is you're asking for guidance from God as you do these things, right? It's not that you have to like ask for God's will in every little thing you do. It's you live your life in such a way that you are trying your best to do it in the way that God would want you to do it. And so you follow God's will. And if you see that he doesn't want you to do something, that's whenever you should shift and change that. And so if he really is the Lord of our lives, we see that all things, coming from his hands, everything comes from him, and we speak of plans and outcomes accordingly. So we look at everything, in the sense that, doing the will of God as we live our daily lives. And so that's what he's talking about here, you know, wrapping this section up. He's talking about we need to live our lives. If we have saving faith, true saving faith, that, faith that is actionable, faith that has actions, right? If we truly have that, then we are going to live our lives like God is the center of it, and the plan in our planning, and not like an atheist, and just go about our own way, rarely consulting whether it's the God will or not, or whether God would want us to do something, just doing whatever we want. And that's what James is saying in this. And then he ends that, right. He ends it with a verse, and it's honestly kind of unlike a lot of the verses when talking about sinning that we see in the Bible, where James basically says, look, if you know to do something and you don't do it, that's a sin. And so sin is not only doing what God forbids, right? These are what we call sins of commission, right? It's also, right, it's also sinning to fail to do what God asks us to do, which is a sin of omission. And so there's a lot of things that God asks us to do. And this is where I see sometimes, like a lot of times in Christianity, we'll think, oh, well, I'm good because I'm not doing any of these sins of commission, right? But at the same time, it's like I'm doing it, like I'm not doing any of these things, right? But at the same time, we're not doing a lot of the things God has asked us to do. It's like, oh, well, I'm not doing any things he's told us not to do, but we're not doing things he's asked us to do. And so we got to live both of those out, right? It's a sin to lie, but it's also a sin to know the truth and not tell it, right? In a loving manner, of course. And that's what I'm getting at. It's like a lot of times it's like we allow things to happen because it's like, well, I don't want to get involved in that. I don't want to, but that's not what we're told to do, right? We're told to help each other. We're told to, if we see someone sinning, to help them in their sin, right? Not help them in their sin, but help them, overcome that sin. We're to get involved, right? We should never sit by while we see things happening, especially in the church, right? That shouldn't be happening. Because the way I read this is, if you sit by and allow that to happen, you're just as guilty as the people doing it. And so we need to, as Christians, we have to, make sure that and again, we're not going to be, I'll always say this, we're not going to be perfect in this. So, but we have to make sure that we are doing the things that we're told to do, and obviously do the things we're not do the things we're told not to do. And so I'll finish it with this. Like, if it's a sin to speak evil of someone, right? But it's also a sin to avoid that person when you know your friendship is needed, or to avoid a person, right? It's all, you have flip sides of all these things. And so we need to be very careful not to get caught up in the, well, I'm not doing any of these things that God tells me not to do, but while at the same time we're just avoiding all the things he tells us to do. And so we've got to be very, very careful in that, and understand the seriousness of that, because I've seen where, like, not acting when you should be acting can be just as damaging as someone who's purposely sinning or willfully sinning. So both sides can be just as damaging, if not more, on the omission side, to be honest with you. And so we've got to make sure that we do those and follow up with that. And so that's what James again was hitting there. And so again, like I said, these are three or four short verses here that we're hitting, and we're going to kind of hit some smaller sections the rest of the week. Tomorrow we will look at a warning to the rich. James is kind of hits to the rich, but again, I hope everyone is enjoying these videos. I hope you're learning from them. I hope that you are continuing to dive deeper in the scripture as we study these. As always, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to watch these, whether they're 8 to 10 minutes long or 20 minutes long. I understand our lives are busy, and so to take that time, I really do appreciate that. As always, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, go ahead and do that so you get the alerts when we publish these every day. And as always, I appreciate everyone for watching.